ready? And the timer? All right. 1877. An interesting year it was, 1877. It's included in the timeline of the great old American West. They liked using adjectives back then. But as I was saying, it was the great old American West, and a lot of interesting things happened way back then. I was asked to come before you today and tell you about one of those sad, interesting things, but I sat back and I wondered what to tell you about. How can I fit just one of the events into this one little year? Have you got any ideas? No, of course not. Of course not. That's it. Oh, I know what I'll tell you about. So lean in close, open your ears, and give your attention to me. Because whether you lived in Arizona all your life, or perhaps you're just a tourist from the next state over, I'm sure that this will draw your interest. The town that was too tough to die. The story of how Tombstone, Arizona was first founded. Now, as I was saying, the year was 1877, and way back then there lived a man by the name of Ed Schieffelin. He's kind of important, you'll want to remember that. So, Ed Schieffelin was a prospector who was living in the Camp Huachuca. Now, the purpose of this camp was to scout out against the Indians who had been running rampant in the surrounding areas. So he was a part of this camp, and he was training daily to be a good old cowboy, soldier, whatever you want to call it. But he wasn't content with his life. You see, Ed was a daydreamer, but I almost feel bad calling him that because whenever people would look at him and say, "Ed, get your head out of the clouds," he'd say, No, I'm not dreaming. I'm just describing my destiny." Because he was 100% confident that this dream of his was not that, but it was reality. It was his future that would most definitely happen. For certain. And so everyone sat back and they said that he was crazy. They had no idea what he was talking about because his so-called reality went a little something like this. One of these days he would finally get out of Camp Huachuca, he'd pack up, set off on a mighty fine adventure, and he'd strike it rich in a silver or gold mine. Now, there weren't a lot of these silver or gold mines back then, and there was only a few that were actually worth mining in, and that were safe to mine in. But Ed was certain that he would be one to find one of these said mines. But all of the people in the camp just looked at him and they said, "The only thing you'll find out there is your tombstone, because you'll surely die before you find anything worthwhile." Well, eventually Ed did find a mine that was filled with millions and millions of dollars worth of silver. So, rather smugly, he decided to call the mine Tombstone. Because after all, that's all they said he would find anyways. And so Ed, he sat back and he said, "I'm not going to tell anyone about this mine," because nobody had believed in him, and thus he had been the only one to set out on this adventure to find the mine. He had found it himself, so he would keep it to himself. And for about 7 to 8 months, that's exactly what happened. Everything was mighty fine and very dandy. He took those silver from the mine, went into town, and he made his fortune. Everything was great in Ed's life, until one day, a curious stranger decided they wanted to know where this man was getting all this money, where he was getting all this silver from. So they followed him back to Tombstone one day, and let's just put it this way. When that one stranger found out where the mine was, it seemed that everyone and their mother knew the location of Tombstone. And so Ed, he said, okay, you can take a few close family and friends that will help me mine. We'll come together and have our own little camp. A few people, he said. In the span of just 7 years, Tombstone had grown to be the largest town in the entire American West. With a population of over 100,000 people and an estimated 430 different buildings in the city, it was the fastest growing, most money-making town the entire West had ever seen. And so the people outside of the town, they sat back and they said, "This is crazy. This town hasn't been even around for a decade yet. How is it possible that they're making so much money?" It was the mine, you see. Everyone in the town worked in this mine if they were able to. So everyone in the town had their fair share of money from it. And so Tombstone was great. It was prosperous. Everything was perfect. Until in about 1880, a fire swept through the town. It burned over half of the city to ashes, including parlors, saloons, bars, and brothels, and all was destroyed. It was tragic. The people outside of the town looked on and they said, surely these people will be smart enough to get on out of here. Surely they'll know that natural disasters such as this fire come often in Arizona, and they'll leave. But no, that wasn't the case. The people of Tombstone were too tough, maybe even a little too tough for their own good, and so they built the city up again, bigger and better than ever. 2 years passed since the fire ravaged the town, and everything was once more perfect. But then, lo and behold, a second fire ran through Tombstone, burning even worse than the first. It burned all the buildings to the ground, it hurt the animals, destroyed the very few crops they had somehow managed to start growing, and it even killed about a dozen civilians. But Tombstone lived up to the name they had gotten from the last natural disaster, the town that was too tough to die. They built up once more. You know, people said that surely they'd be smart enough to leave this time, but we all know that the people of Tombstone were never considered to be that smart anyways. So Tombstone lived on, and that's how they were founded. It was a mighty fine town, and they grew to be one of the finest cities in the whole American West. And nowadays, it's just become nothing more than a tourist trap, but that's all right, because if we can all remember how this great city was founded, we can keep in mind that this town does have something good about it. But going back to Ed Schieffelin's story, he served as town founder, mayor, sheriff, and many other titles of power for the first decade or so that the town existed. But then he eventually retired, but at the same time, the town still respected all that he had donated to them. So one day, Ed was strolling down the road, minding his own business, just sauntering down the street. When all of a sudden, this man runs up to him and says, Ed, we just built this mighty fine corral down the lane, and due to us respecting all the work you've done for us, we want you to come, take a look, and name it for us. So Ed said, okay, fine, and he walked on down, looked at the corral, and he says, well, looks like a pretty okay corral to me, but that's an entirely different story. Thanks for listening.